Welcome to War Room, the official podcast of the U.S. Army War College online journal, graciously supported by the Army War College Foundation. Please join the conversation at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. We hope you enjoy the program.
Greetings from Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, and thanks for joining us on the War Room podcast. I'm Colonel Buck Habrichter, United States Air Force, and faculty instructor in the Department of Command, Leadership, and Management, as well as part of the War Room editorial team. I'm joined today by Brigadier General James Blankenhorn. He is the former commander of the Command and Control Chemical, Biological, Radiological, Nuclear Response Element Alpha. For ease of discussion, we'll refer to that from here on out as C2 Cree Alpha. And in terms of the chemical, biological, radiological, we'll call that CBRN for all of the folks out there. General Blankenhorn is at the War College today to address the topic of DSCA, Defense Support of Civil Authorities, with the resident class of academic year 18. And he's been gracious enough to join us for this podcast. Sir, welcome to Carlisle and welcome to the War Room.
Well, thank you.
Sir, you operate in a world that many of us are just not even familiar with. We have very little exposure to, or at least we're not aware of how much we're exposed to it. Can you explain what that title entailed in terms of the C2 Cree Alpha? What does it actually do? What are some of your responsibilities associated with that?
Sure, that's it's a broad question, but I think I can boil it down to a few key points. Under the Homeland Security portfolio, there's a mission for Department of Defense to provide defense support to civilian authorities. And specifically under DSCA, there are 4 tasks. One of them is to provide support to a CBRN incident within the United States. And so there is a CBRN infrastructure or an enterprise that's been developed that supports a command and control element that includes both state, National Guard, Title 10 active component, and Army Reserve Compo 3 forces. And so the mission is it's different than what we would normally refer to as our wartime mission or a green mission, in that it doesn't involve combat operations. This involves providing support to federal agencies in response to a natural or a man-made incident in the United States. And the DSCA mission, as I mentioned, has 3 separate units, the DSURF, the Cree Alpha, and the Cree Bravo. And just a quick note on those, the DSURF is primarily a active component, Compo 1 sourced unit. It does have some Compo 3 specialty units assigned to it.
And just to be clear, the DSURF, that is the defense, that's a CBRN response force.
That's right.
Right? Okay.
That's right.
So they're actually responding to some sort of incident that's happened.
CBRN incident in the United States. The C2 Cree Alpha and the C2 Cree Bravo, the Alpha is the responsibility of Compo 3, so it's primarily an Army Reserve sourced element. It does have some active component units. It does have some Air Force, some Navy units assigned to it that augment it. And then the Cree Bravo, C2 CRE Bravo is a National Guard responsibility for sourcing. So in terms of the mission set, what makes it different than perhaps what other folks are used to, again, is it's heavy on combat support, combat service support. It's light on, obviously, combat operations. In terms of the mission sets that the unit performs, they're in some cases, very similar to what we would perform in combat, but there are some nuances, and we'll talk a little bit more about what some of the training and certification requirements are to conduct the mission. But the interesting thing for me, anyway, about the mission set is it is about a whole of government approach. It's about DoD support to federal agencies within the United States that are responding to a CBRN event specifically, and knowing that the Department of Defense has some of the best trained and qualified resources and assets to fill that mission. it also is a little bit different from a command and control structure. In this particular case, the Army is not in command. We're in a support role to another federal agency, typically FEMA, but it could be any one of the 26 federal agencies that might have a lead in response, but typically it's FEMA. And so we're in a support role, and sometimes that's a little bit challenging for folks to wrap their mind around a bit. We're trained and we're driven and we're brought up to take charge and to get engaged quickly and make things happen. And so you have to put the brakes on a bit and understand that we're there to support, we're there to provide specific capabilities when requested, and others are in charge. And so it's a little bit of a different concept for some folks to take on. But
your task essentially is on America's worst day, when there is some sort of nuclear burst or dirty bomb or chemical or biological incident in some major U.S. city, you're standing everything up, and it takes off from that point, and you're beginning your defense support of civil authorities. How is that? What are the nuances that are different from someone who's doing that in a hurricane situation?
Yeah, so what we've done in terms of the U.S. government, we've developed a national framework to respond to incidents within the United States. And so for something like a hurricane, as an example, the difference there is that over time, local capacity, state capacity has developed a great deal of response. And when you're talking about a hurricane, you're looking at having a week, 2 weeks notice. You know it's coming. You know what its strength is. You sort of have some idea of its track and its landfall. And so there's a lot of pre-planning that can go on in terms of preparation, in terms of moving people around, relocating folks, protecting critical infrastructure that may be in the path, and planning the response and recovery, pre-staging a lot of things. And so there's a great deal of advance planning that gets to go into something like that. When we talk about some of the hazards represented by a terrorist attack, as an example, a nuclear detonation within the United States, we don't have the luxury of prepping the battlefield for that response, and so it really comes down to wargaming those scenarios, making sure that we've rehearsed them to the extent we can, practicing them to the extent we can, and then ensuring that again, that when something happens, and you hope it never does, but recognizing that if something like that were to happen, it's going to quickly overwhelm local and state resources. Federal response is going to be required. Department of Defense is going to be the key contributor to that support. And again, we train our folks hard for that. Again, we hope that we're never called, but we also understand that we have to be as ready as absolutely possible in the event that we are called. So it makes there's a uniqueness to response to a sea burn event different than a hurricane response, which when you look at response over the years, arguably the response capabilities get better and better as civilian capabilities are built out.
Mm-hmm. So it's my understanding that a DSURF element was actually deployed recently in support of some of the recent hurricanes we've had. Is that a good thing? Why are we doing that? What should the public citizen know about that, and what kind of positive developments are coming out of that?
Well, I do think it's a positive development. So they didn't deploy the entire DSURF. They deployed a specific capability that the DSURF had available to it. I think it's very powerful. We've got for our nation, we've got events that occur, and again, as part of that prior planning and pre-planning, the states know where their gaps are in terms of capability, and so knowing that the Department of Defense has those capabilities, and and calling on them specifically, I think is a great attribute for the DSERF and the C2 CREs to have. I think it's extremely valuable in terms of showing and demonstrating support to the nation in time of crisis. It's absolutely necessary in terms of preventing loss of life and mitigating the consequences and mitigating damage. So I think it's positive. Now the area where I think we need to do some additional or further consideration is that DSERF is a standing unit that has a specific mission and has a set organization with set capabilities. And if you take a piece of that capability and deploy it on another mission so that it's now no longer available to the DSERF, again, you hope the DSERF is never required. But if it were, we need to make sure that we've considered what our options and alternatives are in terms of should we backfill that capability or at least put another capability on call, possibly from the C2 CRE Alpha or Bravo units or some other sourcing. But we don't want to leave, I don't think we want to leave that DSERF capability vulnerable while we deploy units in support of our nation's needs. So I think it's positive, but I do think we need to carefully consider the consequences if we create a gap.
So in your position as a former commander, you had about 1,500 folks under you in that at the C2 CRE. Significant number of officers, presumably. Can you tell us what were your experience with Army colonels or their equivalents in terms of their experience levels, how well prepared they were for the job? What made some of them stand out to you? What kind of characteristics are you looking for in senior leaders along the way like this?
So just to back up a step, the 76th Division is an Army Reserve division responsible for operational response, and within that command structure, it's a 2-star command structure. Within that organization is Task Force 76, which is also a 2-star command. So the commander and DCG of the division are dual-hatted as the commander and DCG of the task force. The task force itself is the element that has been identified as the C2 CRE Alpha proponent. And so when we look at the skills and capabilities of the officers and senior NCOs that make up that task force, understand that first we're pulling from a traditional TO&E division headquarters. And so you get typically you get what you would expect from a division headquarters that has had a war perspective and a view towards conducting and fighting our nation's battles. So when it comes to organizational skills, when it comes to decision making, when it comes to planning and logistics, when it comes to mobilization of units, command and control of units, mission assignments, and those kinds of things, you find a very good crossover in terms of capabilities. Where some additional training is necessary to complete the DISCA part of this is those officers have to be trained on the DISCA mission itself, and there's Army North runs a 1-week course to get DISCA qualified, and there's some upfront work you do in preparation for that course. But then there's also a number of training and certifications that, in addition, that we prefer to run our officers through and senior NCOs, because it's important that they understand, again, this concept of the Department of Defense or the Army is not in charge. They're a support organization. They get tasked by civilian authorities to perform certain missions, and then it's our job to perform those missions. And so the logistics of and sustainment of the force under those types of conditions, remember they're not battlefield conditions, but they're expected to be pretty austere, given that we're responding to an area that's had a nuclear strike. So we can expect power grids to be down and water to be down, and so basic life-supporting necessities to be down. Protecting the force during the conduct of those missions is something that requires some additional thought and leadership. The relationships is something that our officers often have to rethink and relook. Again, it's a lot of A personalities, and now we find ourselves more in a partnership relationship where we're advising, providing consultation to civilian authorities who are then making decisions for us to execute. And so developing those relationships, developing those partnerships is, again, it's additional skill that we're not turning them into politicians by any means, but they do need to be able to interact with a host of different entities that have different priorities, different perspectives. So that unity of effort concept definitely comes to play and is critical to the success of anybody that's working in this type of an organization.
So what I hear you describing in there essentially is many of the themes we discuss here at the War College in terms of we're experts in the operational realm. We are so good at the logistics sustainment, all the things that happen to keep us operating in the greater DoD. That strategic realm that they're entering into is obviously a little more gray. And
it is.
There is no easy answer as to how to build someone who can now communicate with everyone that doesn't necessarily speak Hua, and get out there and talk to all kinds of folks from different backgrounds and not come across as taking over on a regular basis.
No, you're spot on. In fact, one of the things that we also have challenges with, we're very much used to operating in an environment where we have a common operating picture where all of our partners can access that, and it's usually on the high side. When we're dealing with civilian agencies or federal agencies, they don't necessarily have those same tools and capabilities. Communication systems aren't as what we're expecting and robust. And so how we tie in to the communications framework and network, or how we augment and support it, is again a different task. How we develop that common operating picture, that whether we're developing it and sharing it with all the partners, or whether we're helping another federal agency develop it and distribute it, those are key things that, again, are critical and that our folks have to be more strategically aligned on. The other thing that you mentioned, it's not the same vernacular, so we can't use all of our acronyms. We can't use all of our military symbols and graphics. It won't mean anything to the local fire chief. He's looking at where his water is and where his routes are, and so we have to relearn and perhaps in some cases help others understand the graphics and terminology and symbols that we want to use, or at least that we would propose to use in this type of environment. And that's all got to be done very quickly. It's got to be done without damaging relationships, because at the end of the day, it's all about getting the support and getting the services to the field as quickly as possible, so that we can again accomplish the primary purpose, which is to save lives and reduce suffering.
So knowing that this strategic development of our officers is more of an art form than it is a science in many cases, aside from obviously getting them to attend senior service colleges where we ideally develop some of these things, do you have anything in terms of professional development, reading lists or case studies or things like that you think would help people along the way with some of those concepts?
As an Army reservist, I also have a civilian job, and as a senior leader in my civilian job, we're constantly teaching, and we've got our own required reading list for leadership and communications, and so there's a number of both training and written formats out there in terms of leadership, in terms of effective communications, in terms of problem solving. Stephen Covey has got his 7 basic habits, but he's not the only one. There's several different concepts, and so that's really all about developing relationships as well as providing the leadership. And so I would definitely would encourage our military audience to look outside of the traditional military leadership references and look to some of those references that are out there in the civilian industry. I tend to have to read. I say have to, but I tend to read those probably one a month. Some different leadership or communications document has crossed my desk to catch up on. There are some other documents out there that I'm reading one now. It's a little bit unorthodox when you think about it in terms of a leadership reading list, but for those that are interested in this type of mission and the response, there's a book called The Great Influenza by John Barry. And what it does is it sort of documents, it tells the story, but it's got a lot of technical content and a historical accuracy to it. It tells the story of how during the early 1900s we had the flu that swept through in 1918, 1919, 1920, and the casualties around the world. But it talks about how that flu strain went through the changes that it went through and how it was spread and where it started, and then the medical community, how the medical community had to stand up and chase this throughout the world. And there's a number of strong examples of leadership, individual leadership that was taken to set up what had to be national response when national response capabilities didn't exist. And so it's an interesting read. It's very interesting from a science or biology perspective, but there's a, without sounding alarmist, it's possible for something like that to occur again, pretty much at any time. We go through multiple strains of the flu virus every year, and you just have to get the right combination for one to be as lethal as that one was. So it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when, and there's a lot of lessons I think we can learn in terms of how our country responded to that. So it's an interesting book that I'm reading now that folks might be interested in.
So that's a very valid point. We've been talking about this in terms of suburban threats and in terms of more along the terrorist lines of things. Yeah. There obviously are natural disasters that could occur, and by natural I mean you could have some sort of strain of flu.
Sure. We're
used to seeing that. We watched it over the last few years as we've had confounding strains pop up. We always think of CDC or World Health Organization being involved with those. Mm-hmm. At what threshold would you see that the C2 CRE is involved with that? Where does that really step in and step up?
Well, so, and this is my view. It's probably written somewhere in our doctrine, but the activation or the mobilization of the DSURF or the C2 CRE Alpha or C2 CRE Bravo comes after a presidential declaration. And so, there are many events that occur throughout the year, whether it's floods or hurricanes or tornadoes or fires, or those things occur routinely. They don't rise to the level of requiring federal response because the state has and the local communities have response organizations, and they respond well to those things and recover well. But at the point in time when local and state resources are overwhelmed and it then becomes a federal response required, a presidential declaration has been made, then the activation of those CRE Alpha, Bravo, and DSURF units is imminent. So if it's a biological threat like a flu virus that starts and then it could be we saw the Zika virus and how it sort of started to take hold, and then we got that under control. That was more of a CDC response. Just recently you probably noticed there was another Ebola outbreak, and so again the WHO organization is dealing with that. When it starts to cross borders and we start to engage multiple either regions or areas, or it becomes a threat to the U.S., or when we start to exceed, whether it's physically exceed the capacity of responders, or emotionally we start to exceed the capacity of responders, and we go to a presidential declaration, then I would expect you'd see those types of units get engaged. Before then, again, these units aren't designed necessarily to be the upfront research and development capabilities. They're designed to be the response and recovery capabilities. So we'll continue to see CDC and WHO and others take the lead to first identify that something is happening, and then take the appropriate actions to mitigate and contain. At the point, like I said, when it starts to exceed their capacity, or they're unsuccessful in containing, then you'll see a national response or a government response.
In a situation like that, is your organization read in from the beginning, regardless of meeting that threshold? Are you being briefed thoroughly along the way, so it's not a full spin up as you hit that threshold, or are you on board from the beginning of the threat?
Yeah, there's obviously a number of levels of information sharing, compartmentalized information, et cetera. But the way the organizations are designed, we have a structure that has early entry type elements. So each FEMA region has FEMA resources that are engaged in staying in tune with what's happening within their region. The state obviously has got its resources and up to and including a state emergency operations center. We've got defense coordinating officials, one per FEMA region. We've also got emergency planning liaison officers, which are Compo 3, 06s from the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy that are in each state, that are very closely tied in with state EOCs and with National Guards. We have the relationships with the National Guard units who again, are going to be engaged as things start to occur within their states. And so I do think there is going to be advance warning. Obviously, Army North and NORTHCOM as the land component is going to know what's happening from a biological perspective, a natural biological perspective, as things start to spin up. And then we've got a number of hospital and docs and nurses and those types of units that are involved either as reservists or Guard members or active component members throughout the United States. So I do think there'll be early warning. I think there'll be a spin up of intel. I don't foresee the units being thrown into the mix without some type of an advance read on and preparation, just based on how those types of things would develop.
So you brought it up earlier. You are a reserve component officer, and you do have a civilian job as well.
That's correct.
We talk to senior leaders that come through all the time, and we ask about how do you find balance? And more often than not, the answer we get is, well, I've never done too well up to this point in my career, but you need to do much better than me. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd probably give the same answer. I do work for a large architectural engineering firm as a senior VP, and coincidentally, for me anyway, my responsibilities are to manage and operate high hazard facilities for the Department of Energy. So there are nuclear facilities, there are chemical facilities, processing facilities. And it's not just the operations of them. I also have responsibility for decon and decommissioning, and then environmental restoration and cleanup. So a lot of the things that we have to think about from a DISCA perspective, I do on a civilian side for my civilian job. So now back to your question, how do you balance that? I would probably say again that I haven't done well in balancing family life, civilian occupation, and then the demands of the military. And as it's just a part of the job as you rise in rank and responsibility and authorities, the time commitment on an Army reservist goes up. And so it is difficult because something has to give. If you just look at the time requirements to do your civilian job, which is a standard 40-hour-a-week job, never 40 hours, it's always more than that, but that's what's advertised, and then you put on top of that the requirements to perform military responsibilities. It then doesn't leave a whole lot of time for family, and so it is difficult. You have to make you're constantly making priority decisions. You're constantly looking at, are there ways to delegate for others to do some of these things for the civilian job and the military jobs. And so I would say there's no easy answer for this. I tended to set up a regime for me personally that requires, some time on the computer or with the military unit before going to work, and then I'd go perform my job, and the phone was always on, so he was always receiving calls throughout the day, and then setting aside an hour or two at the end of the day to sort of repeat the process, and then trying to allocate a couple hours to family. It never seemed to work. That was always the plan, but it never seemed to work as ideally as you'd like it. And so it does take some discipline. It's not, the right answer is not to give up one or the other, or any one of the three, quite frankly. But you do have to have your priorities in order. And so, as an Army reservist, and as a leader, I've constantly reinforced, look, your first priority is to the family. Your second priority is to your civilian job, and your third priority is to the military. And when you're performing tasks, you want to do them obviously to the best capability that you can. And so you can't half step it. If you're going to do it, you got to do it all in. But it is extremely. I just tell you, it's extremely complicated. There's just not enough time in every day to do everything that you need to do and do it well. So it becomes a balance of priority, and it becomes a lot of trade-offs, and quite frankly, having good staffs, both on civilian jobs and military, that can help ease the burden, and then again having the support and love of your family that knows that you've got these demands but understands the importance of it. So. No easy answers, and I'm sorry to say I probably fall into the category of everyone else. Cannot say that I've been successful.
Honest answer. All right, sir, parting shot. What do you want the American public, the listeners of this podcast, to know about the DISCA mission, or about the forces that support that, or Submerged, or C2CRE Alpha?
Well, I think it's first of all, I think we haven't done, I don't believe we've done a very good job of communicating to the military or to the civilian population the extraordinary capability and the talent and experience that the C2CRE and the DSURF and that the Guard response units have. It's an amazing capability, and it truly is. It surpasses anything else that you've probably been exposed to. So I think the first thing is I would propose that we communicate that skill and that capability, not because I want to assure the public that nothing bad's going to happen, but I do want to leave them with the confidence that if something were to happen, we've got the best and the brightest ready and prepared to step in and make a difference quickly. I think from an assignment perspective, what I would reach out to our military community and just remind them that as important as assignments are, if you get the opportunity to be a defense coordinating official, or you get the opportunity to be a state EPLO, or you're assigned to one of the units that has a DISCA mission, those are positions that you ought to seek out. They're extremely valuable in terms of their broadening. They're extremely valuable in terms of the strategic development that they offer. They're great opportunities to develop relationships with other federal agencies and civilian communities. It's a great skill set to have and a great experience to have. So I would encourage our military folks to seek those positions out. It will only help in terms of career aspirations, showing that broadness and the depth that you get from those positions. They are very high visibility, high priority units. They have to be ready. There's no second chance. There's no do-over. There's no timeouts. You get one shot at it, and you hope that you never get called. But if you do, you get one shot at it, and you got to be at the top of your game. And so they're very high up-tempo units, very important, high visibility, well-funded, and they start. The mission starts at the national level. I mean, the response, the capability, and the ability to respond to these incidents is spelled out in the national strategy all the way down. So that's I think what I'd leave. One is we got to do better communicating the capability, and two, we really need to encourage senior leaders to take the opportunities when they arise to move into these types of units and get this experience.
Excellent. Sir, thanks for coming out to Carlisle. I know the students appreciated their discussion with you today. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down with us here in the War Room, and we wish you all the best as you go on from this.
Well, thank you. This was a great opportunity, and I wish the best to all of our senior leaders out there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And that concludes our program. Thank you for listening. The views expressed in this podcast reflect those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense. Let us know what you think. Provide us your feedback, comments, or suggestions through our webpage at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. And have a great day.